Welcome to The Explainer. We are jumping right in today, taking a fascinating journey through 1,000 years of history. And we're going to completely dismantle that popular myth of the Dark Ages. Drawing directly from our source chapter, we'll uncover what actually happened in Europe between 500 and 1500 CE. So prepare to have your preconceptions challenged. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for how we're going to explore this era. 1. Beyond the Dark Ages. 2. Fall of the Roman Empire. 3. Feudalism and social order. 4. Innovations and daily life. 5. The Byzantine Empire. And finally, 6. End of the Middle Ages. All right, Section 1. Beyond the Dark Ages. When you hear the term Middle Ages, do you automatically picture this stagnant, grim period where human progress basically just hit a wall? Well, let's challenge that misconception right out of the gate. Looking at the timeline, this era spans a massive block of time, roughly from the fall of Rome in 476 CE all the way up to around 1500 CE. It's broken down into early, central, or high, and late periods. Honestly, it's just way too massive a stretch of human existence to simply slap the label dark on it. In fact, as our source material reveals, it was anything but dark. It was actually an incredibly vibrant era. Because of constant migrations, frequent military expeditions, and expanding trade routes, this period was a dynamic cultural melting pot. We see some amazing social, economic, and technological advancements coming out of the interaction between diverse groups, like Germanic tribes, Arabs, and Christians. Progress didn't stop, you guys, it just changed its shape. Section 2. Fall of the Roman Empire. Now, to understand how this new era began, we really have to look at the huge catalyst that started the whole thing, the collapse of an absolute superpower. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how a mighty empire falls, because it's rarely just one thing, right? Internally, we see widespread decay, corruption of the nobility, an increasingly weak military bogged down by internal fighting, totally inefficient administration, and severe economic troubles. Then, add in the external pressures. A harsh climate was literally pushing invading groups like the Huns, Goths, and Vikings to attack Roman borders in search of new lands. Toss in a divided empire and widespread diseases, and you've got a perfect storm. This exact combination is what caused Rome to finally collapse in 476 CE, kicking off a massive social and political reorganization. Section 3. Feudalism and social order. So, with the centralized protection of Rome completely gone, people were desperate for a new way to stay safe and just stay fed. That survival mechanism? Feudalism. It became the defining social system of medieval Europe. The word itself comes from Latin terms meaning fee and fief. And here's how the whole system worked. The king, sitting right at the top, technically owned all the land. He distributed this land, these fiefs, down to nobles and church officials, and in exchange, they promised loyalty and military service. Those nobles then parceled out land to knights to build up an army. And at the very bottom, supporting this entire massive structure, were the peasants and serfs who actually worked the land to provide the food and the money. Now, the daily reality of where you sat in that hierarchy was incredibly stark. Lords and nobles at the top managed the estates, organized military campaigns, and got to enjoy leisure stuff like hunting, hawking, and horseback riding. Contrast that with the peasants and serfs. They were literally bound to the land as laborers. Their entire existence was just hardship, meager diets, and backbreaking agricultural work. And the absolutely crucial point here is that this created a permanent class divide. Because fiefs became hereditary, serfs had almost zero opportunity for social mobility. You were essentially stuck where you were born. But there was one institution that actually crossed all of these rigid boundaries. Since traditional state governments were so weak and fractured at the time, the Catholic Church stepped in as the ultimate organizational and spiritual glue holding Western Europe together. The Pope held unbelievable power, literally anointing kings and emperors. The church wasn't just for worship. It catered to political and social needs, too. By hosting weekly services and crucial life events like marriages and funerals, it effectively unified what was otherwise a deeply divided society. Section 4. Innovations and daily life. As we move into the high or central Middle Ages around the 9th century, society really begins to stabilize. And with that stability comes an era bursting with surprising growth and completely new routines. We see peasants working the land and managing livestock using far better farming methods, which played a huge role in shaping society. As these agricultural techniques improved, they led to a massive increase in output. Suddenly, the nobility found themselves with a huge excess of crops, and they desperately needed a way to turn those physical goods into cold, hard cash. Now, what's really interesting here is the sheer scale of innovation. It absolutely proves this wasn't some stagnant frozen era. Take the discovery of beans, for instance. Sounds simple, but was revolutionary. It provided a cheap, highly balanced diet for everyone, which directly fueled rapid population growth. Windmills popped up, enabling efficient grain grinding in areas that didn't have much water. In science and tech, gunpowder was discovered, and mechanical clocks literally changed how humanity measured time. Even architecture saw massive, soaring leaps with Gothic building techniques and the construction of those iconic, formidable medieval castles we all know today. So going back to that excess agricultural output, remember how the nobility needed cash? Well, they actually considered manual labor or commerce totally beneath their elite status. This created a massive economic gap, which perfectly paved the way for the middlemen, the millers, merchants, and bankers. This entirely new social class, the middle class, started accumulating serious wealth, and that wealth sparked a chain reaction. Towns flourished along coastal and river trade routes, vibrant weekly fairs became a staple, and there was a huge surge in intellectual activity, most notably with the founding of the very first universities. Section 5. The Byzantine Empire. Now, while Western Europe was busy reinventing itself, you might be wondering, what on earth happened to the surviving half of the Roman Empire? Well, geographically, the eastern half actually kept going for another 1,000 years. Known as the Byzantine Empire, it absolutely thrived across Asia Minor, Greece, and parts of Italy and North Africa. It acted as this incredibly prosperous, crucial bridge between East and West. Let's trace the major timeline beats of this incredible empire. It all kicks off in 330 CE when Constantine I conquered an ancient Greek colony and set up a brand new capital, Constantinople. They hit a major golden age under Emperor Justinian, who gave us the famous Roman Code of Law and built the absolutely breathtaking Hagia Sophia. Fast forward to 1054 CE, and building cultural and theological tensions finally snap in the Great Schism, which officially splits Christianity into the Western Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches. Finally, this remarkably long-lasting empire meets its definitive end in 1453 CE. But before it fell, the Byzantine Empire was an absolute economic powerhouse. Its staggering wealth was driven by heavily monitored trade, making sure everything was fair and regulated. They moved major goods like olive oil, wheat, honey, and fish sauce across vast networks of ships and ancient Roman roads. Plus, they held these large periodic fairs in local covered markets. This didn't just boost local business. Crucially, it brought in massive sums of sales tax revenue for the government, which is exactly what kept the empire so incredibly strong for centuries. Section 6. End of the Middle Ages. So, how exactly does an era spanning a millennium finally wrap up? Well, one major factor was the Crusades, which stretched from 1095 to 1270. Imposing structures like the 12th century Crusader castles built in Lebanon still stand as physical reminders of these massive, multi-generational military expeditions. Christians launched them to take control of Jerusalem and other holy sites. And while they did lead to some really profound cultural interactions and a broader acceptance of diverse societies, the constant warfare also caused immense chaos, human misery, and a devastating drain on economic resources. Let's move on and see how this builds, because it's essentially a domino effect that completely shattered that feudal pyramid we looked at earlier. First, the endless wars and devastating plagues wiped out huge chunks of the population. That led to severe labor shortages, and large agricultural estates were simply abandoned. Second, as commerce kept growing, cities expanded rapidly, and actual coinage, real money, began to replace the old land barter system. Third, because wards could suddenly pay kings with money instead of providing military service, kings just started hiring professional mercenaries instead of knights. Meanwhile, serfs realized they could use this cash economy to buy land and purchase their own freedom. Ultimately, monarchs used taxes from these newly rich towns to maintain centralized armies, completely bypassing the nobles and rendering the entire feudal system totally redundant. But the definitive nail in the coffin happened in the East. This is the dramatic culmination of the Byzantine Empire. In May 1453, Sultan Mehmed II of the Ottoman Empire launched a grueling 55-day siege on Constantinople. By using a brilliant strategic blend of land and sea forces and unleashing relentless, heavy cannon fire, they finally breached the city's ancient, seemingly impenetrable walls. This pivotal moment didn't just end an empire. It removed a crucial defense for Christian Europe and opened the door for the rapid expansion of the Ottoman Empire, permanently rewriting the geopolitical map. And that brings us to the end of our journey today. The Middle Ages were ultimately brought to a close by constant invasions, the total collapse of old social systems, and some really severe scarcities of food and money. But human beings are incredibly resilient, right? This constant struggle and necessity literally forced humanity to look outward, to travel, and to desperately search for new ways to earn a living. That restless curiosity perfectly set the stage for an entirely new, explosive era, the Age of Discovery. Considering just how much the world evolved during the so-called Dark Ages, you really have to wonder, what will humanity uncover next when it finally sets sail across those uncharted oceans? Thank you so much for exploring with us today.